Jennifer and Bond Consulting. They were founded in 2005. Bond Consulting Group offers the most sophisticated and comprehensive SR&ED solution in Canada. They're proud of their effective 100% success rate over the past 15 years. Bond has presided over 2,000 plus successful SR&ED claims in a wide variety of sectors. Bond Consulting Group is conveniently located in Toronto, and they serve clients all across Canada. So Jennifer, you can take it away.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much for the introduction. We will quickly share our screen here so that everybody can see. All right. So Chrissy, thanks. As you are aware, I'm the VP of Operations here at Bond. I've been with the company for over 10 years, so I've certainly seen a lot of changes in the program over the years. Started off assessing cases, moved into a VP of Sales role, and now we look over the SR&ED department in total. We're an award-winning company. Proud of it. We have a female management team, which is nice. And Julie Bond, our president, has been doing this for a number of years now, and certainly an expert in our field. Just a little of what you guys can expect from today. First, we'll talk about what is SR&ED. I'm sure many of you have never heard of it before, and don't really understand the program. We'll talk about criteria, how you might be eligible, some examples, really understanding the kind of boring tax side of it. And then go a little bit through why aren't more people in the farm and agricultural sector claiming for SR&ED. There's a lot of misconceptions and confusion around it, so we'll go through all that. At the end, we've set aside some time for Q&A. I know there might be some specific questions that people have about their businesses, and certainly we can always chat offline to answer some of those for you. So the first things first, SR&ED is a very silly title. No one knows what it stands for. You may have heard it be related to SR&ED before, and we don't shred documents. However, it does stand for scientific research and experimental development. It's a little misleading that when it comes to cases, either you're doing scientific research, which is more laboratory and medical field, or experimental development, where you're trying new things. It's the largest tax incentive program in Canada, and believe it or not, it's been around since the 80s. So there's a lot of companies who are currently not claiming. I would say most importantly, because they've never heard of it before. The government doesn't exactly tell you that they are giving away money to companies for trying new things here. So it is something that there's just not a lot of information about. Many of you have probably heard of grants before. Maybe you've applied for some yourself. It's a similar concept to a grant, but it is administered by CRA, which means it's not subjective. So if you're doing eligible work in Canada, then you're entitled to your piece of the pie. Doesn't matter how many other people apply for it or the size of their cases. It's really something that is dependent on your company itself. The main thing to know about this program, and kind of the meat and potatoes, but in a very generic statement, is really just an advancement in knowledge in a field of science, medicine, or technology within a corporation. To add to that, it should be a Canadian corporation, ideally somebody who is incorporated and not somebody who is considered a sole proprietor or legal partnership. So what I'll get into is a little bit about the scientific research side and the experimental development side. Scientific research, most people think of laboratories and very sophisticated trials and all of that kind of stuff, when really it could be a lot more simple than that. When it comes down to it, it could be something where you're trying to figure out how to get rid of an ailment in animals that might be hurting, a particular breed, and trying to figure out why, versus the experimental development side, which covers most of the projects that people are working on and things they're doing around the farm. From that case, it could be, a better way to milk a cow, for example, that maybe hurts the cow less or is more efficient or something like that. So there's a lot of different examples that we will go through later in the presentation. The program criteria itself is a little misleading, and I think one of the reasons why a lot of people shy away from this in the agricultural sector is because it often talks about technology. So in this case, you can see that in order to qualify, you have to have a technological or scientific uncertainty, meaning there's something you can't answer. From there, you need to come up with a technological or scientific advancement, which means you have an answer. Could be a positive or negative result. Your project or idea could have completely failed and you weren't able to figure it out, or it could be successful and now you have new knowledge for the future. Systematic investigation sounds like a fancy title, but at the end of the day, it's essentially, what did you do? How did you figure out whether you had a success or a failure? And then the end is technical content. So what is it? Did you document the things that you did? Do you have anything to prove the work that you did? That's kind of key when it comes to telling your story to the government.
Can you try sharing your screen again?
Sure, I can. Oh, she wants me to share the screen again. Alrighty, so the eligible industries list is very vast. I'm not going to bore all of you with every single industry that's eligible. However, we did come up with some on here that are a little more relevant to the types of people who would be listening here today. One of them is agricultural sciences. And again, it doesn't necessarily always have to be science, but there's a vast area of things that could be included in this. Your basic agriculture and forestry, even fisheries and aquaculture are included. Soil science is a big one. So figuring out a way to make the soil more mineral rich or have more vitamins in it or hold water content better. And horticulture, viticulture, we've got tons of wineries who are clients from the the agricultural side of things and the growing side of it, but also right down to making the wine itself. Same with breweries, the wheat that they're growing right down to actually producing the product itself. All sorts of stuff, plant breeding, plant protection, whether you're growing plants inside or outside. Every year there's different pests that come along and there's different rules about what you can use to deter those types of pests. So some people get creative in ways to avoid those, whether it's, coming up with a herbicide or something like that that is meeting all of the regulations but will harm the pest kind of thing. Or we've had some clients who've actually introduced other types of insects to get rid of the initial pests. So there's all sorts of areas in which case you could be eligible under this particular category. The dairy science is a big one, as I'm sure you are aware, and some of you might be involved in this. Animal sciences are always a big thing. People are trying to come up with ways to be more efficient. Obviously, nowadays, people care a lot about the care for animals and the outcome of animals and making them as comfortable as possible in their situation. So there's a lot of different things that people are doing, right down to the feed that goes into the animal to make them stronger and avoid disease and stuff like that. Animal husbandry is always one that makes people laugh a little bit. We've got alpaca farmers who have qualified before. So, those are animals, they're not native to this area. They maybe don't like our climate and things like that. You shear them for their wool and stuff like that. So really, it's ways to ensure that these animals are happy and healthy here, while providing a particular product that can then be used for various things. Veterinary science, all of it is science. So at the end of the day, it's no different than a medical doctor, but just on a different animal, obviously. So anybody who's involved in any type of veterinary science, whether it's domestic pets or whether it's farm animals or exotic animals, all of those types of things do qualify, because obviously there's a lot of medical science that is, involved in behind the scenes and a lot of studies and ideas that people are sharing and doing to advance that there. Continuing with agricultural sciences, then there's the more sophisticated ones where it might be in a lab. We have a lot of companies who are involved in the biotechnology side with food. So it could be, growing microgreens that, grow quicker. We've got aquaponics and, all of that type of stuff where people are using different types of animals to produce plants in a quicker rate and in a more sustainable environment. There's obviously the genetically modified area. Most people are trying to stay away from that. However, there's also a lot of companies who are trying to come up with genetically modified products that are safe for people. There's a lot of stuff involved in the diagnostics particularly for animals, trying to figure out the best breeds for certain areas and things like that, as well as feedstock production technologies. There's the biofarming side of things. So obviously there's different types of situations where animals have to be organic and not organic and all of that kind of thing. So there's a lot that go into it. And then there's a whole nother category of just agricultural sciences that I could bore you with forever. Some of the things I want to talk to you about today is a little bit about eligible projects. So I know it can be a little bit confusing about, does my company qualify? Does the work that I'm doing every single day, day in, day out, qualify for this type of program? Or, you know, is it something that I should be doing or could be doing? So I figured what we'd show you is some eligible projects that might resonate a little bit with your company and some of the things that you might be doing. One example is simply new pruning techniques. So whether you are a winery, a fruit farm, growing any type of plant or anything like that, new pruning techniques have been a big thing where there are people who specialize in this area in order to create healthier plants. You know, apple farmers might want to yield more apples on their apple trees every year, so they might be pruning them a different time of year. There's a ton of research and science that goes in behind this, and of course we just get our apples from the grocery store and take it for granted, but you know, they're out in the middle of winter pruning their apple trees so that they yield more apples come the fall time. So this whole area, despite the fact that pruning is a known you know, area of study, there's a lot of things that people are trying and doing all the time in order to improve that. Experimenting with feed is a big one. A lot of different, you know, things that the health conscious people care about these days. There's organic, there's grain fed, there's, you know, free range chickens, all that kind of stuff. So a lot of them care about what they're actually feeding the animals. And in the long run, obviously that helps their health and livelihood. So a lot of times there's people worrying about what are we feeding our animals. They might be trying different types of food or feeding them different times of day. There's climate controls. We've seen artificial you know, outdoor environments brought inside so that chickens could live indoors all year round and avoid the harsh elements and stuff like that. And again, the animal husbandry thing. So essentially that's the breeding of animals. Doesn't matter what breed it is, whether it's a domestic cat or dog, all the way up to, you know, farm animals and things like that. There's often different genetic ways to breed these particular animals. Some want certain strains of a particular animal. So, and crossbreeding, obviously you see it all the time in cats and dogs, all sorts of new breeds coming up here and there. These are our little alpaca guys. And as you can see, super cute. And the people who are housing these guys and breeding them and keeping them alive, believe it or not, you know, do have a lot of science behind it, because again, these are an animal that are not native to this area. So they have to survive our elements, winter, summer, you know, all the different seasons. They've also got to meet all the different standards. And obviously if you are, you know, using them for their hair at the end of the day to produce products, you want to ensure that it is top quality and that it grows back quickly and it's healthy. So there's a lot of science behind it, even if it doesn't sound very sophisticated because it's not being done in a lab. A lot of studies go into food. As you can imagine, there's a ton of money that goes into the food industry every year from an agricultural standpoint. There's a lot of genetics that go into it. Obviously, our lovely honeybees can't do everything, so humans do interject from time to time. And there's a lot of science behind the food. What you feed your animal is important. You know, it could reduce the amount of disease that they might get, especially if they're antibiotic-free animals. It could also help the morbidity rates of animals itself, but also it could enhance the plants themselves. So if you wanted a, you know, different color of rice, for example, like this picture, you wanted white rice because there was a market for that, and the yellow rice, you know, for whatever reason, wasn't as appealing to your consumer. At the end of the day, there might be a way to genetically modify it or just enhance it so that your plants are producing exactly what you want. You see it in flowers and different types of plant species all the time too. Growing plants not native to Canada is almost always eligible. We've got clients who grow all sorts of succulents and some really fancy, pretty, beautiful orchids and things like that, and they're just not native to this area. They, again, don't really like our climate. So there's artificial climates they need to grow in. Sometimes it's very specific depending on the plant. They are very particular about, how much water they get, how much sunlight they get, the heat, and all that kind of stuff. So growing any of these plant species that are not native to here almost always has some sort of element of risk behind it, because ultimately it might not work if the particular plant doesn't like our climate and environment. As well, experimenting with climate and plant nutrition through greenhouses as well as open air has always been a tricky one. Many, large agricultural farms do have greenhouses, they do have outdoor spaces, and obviously we can't control the weather. So some years, like this year, for example, in Ontario, it's been quite dry and quite warm. So anybody who is trying to go grow particular plants outside might have had a harder time doing so because of the lack of natural water that we've received this year. Same thing as somebody who might be growing grapes for their wine production. This year, there's been obviously a lot less water than previous years, and now their, wine that everybody loves and enjoys, their actual recipe might need to change a little bit because the grapes don't have the same water content they did before. So there's a lot of different ways where we try to control things artificially in greenhouses and then outdoors. And our weather at the end of the day dictates a lot of this, so we have to be very adaptable. Wind has always been an area that people are obviously starting to get into, have been into, and continue to do so. There's been all sorts of experiments with windmills for obviously producing energy, but also when it comes to agriculture, there's a lot of ways that windmills can be very effective at reducing frost damage. So as you know, many years ago in Ontario, we had unexpected cold temperatures early, which really did harm the grape crops, for example, for wine that particular year in the Niagara region. So a lot of farmers had to figure out a way to avoid this in the future because, again, we can't control the weather. You can't put blankets on your fruit trees, even though I'm sure it would work well. But, including these windmills in their farms was a way that they could bring some of the warm air down as the warm air is typically rising. So something as simple like this might seem like an easy fix. However, there's a lot of experimentation that goes into it. So it is something that could be absolutely eligible for this program. Again, dairy science is always a big one, and just cattle in general. It's a huge industry, obviously, whether it be for milk itself or for the actual the meat from the animals. So there's a lot of science that goes into this, especially at reducing disease, making the environment ideal for them. Again, whether it's an indoor artificial environment, whether it's a combination of indoor and outdoor. A lot of farmers spend so much time trying to figure out how much time should they spend outside versus inside. Are they more subject to disease if they're going outdoors, being bit by a particular insect that could have some sort of ailment associated with it. So there's a lot of time and energy being spent on what's best for our animals and how can we make it the most efficient. Now, a lot of people say to me, is it worth it? It sounds confusing. I don't understand the program. How much time am I going to spend doing this? Is it really worth it in the end for me? How much money am I going to get back? Am I going to get a few $1,000s or am I going to get $100,000? The quick answer is it depends. We've got some numerical examples that might spell it out a little bit easier for you, so you can kind of see on paper what it might look like. So in this case, and most agricultural claims, there's usually employees and owners who are associated with it. So it could be somebody manning the farm. They don't even necessarily have to be directly involved in the field work or anything like that, but it could be somebody who owns it and is involved in the idea behind things. Then you've got employees who are obviously not the owners. Materials. So it could be crops, it could be particular animals, could be eggs. Again, it really depends on the industry, but you've got materials that you couldn't necessarily sell. And then you might have some subcontractors. Many of our clients who are in the agricultural industry obviously bring on people who are not full-time employees, and they're subcontractors for different growing seasons or harvesting seasons. To break it down easily, the number you care about is the number where it says total credits that's highlighted in red. So if you had owners making about $50,000 towards eligible projects, some non-owners and then just employees around the $50,000 mark, $10,000 in materials and $10,000 in subcontractors, you would be getting a $73,000 check from the CRA to your corporation that you could spend any way you would like. So this program is a little different than some grants out there, again, where some of them tell you what you can spend the money on. In this case, it's an actual refund check, and you can choose to reinvest it back into your business, or ultimately you could go on a nice vacation if the borders ever open up again. Here's a quick example too. I mean, these are probably more realistic numbers for some, but some people have smaller payrolls or smaller operations, which is why we've done both. In this case, let's say you had $100,000 in owner salaries and $100,000 in non-owner salaries. And again, materials could be crop loss, could be things that you ultimately weren't able to sell, or they got damaged or something like that. At $75,000, again, the number that you care about is the $162,000 return that you would be getting back from the CRA in the way of a refund. Now we've calculated these using Ontario numbers. This is a fully Canadian-wide program, so it is available for every single province. The provincial refund is slightly different amounts for every province, but they're all relatively similar, and it is a federal program at the end of the day, so you do get the federal and provincial funding regardless of what province you live in. Without getting into really boring tax stuff and making it too complicated with numbers, I just want to quickly explain a little bit about kind of the back end algorithms that the CRA is using in order to understand this. So the federal side of it, which is again across the board the same number for all, you get 35% of the eligible time and money that you're spending back. So again, if it was $100,000, then you'd be getting $35,000 of federal money back. The nice thing about this program, T4 labor is ideal versus subcontractors because the CRA does mark it up. So you get 55% of that person's eligible time back. So again, if you were claiming $100,000 of someone's time, you'd be getting $55,000 of their salary back in the way of a refund. And most provincial credits are refundable. There are a few provinces that they just put them on as a tax credit, but always that federal portion is refundable no matter what province you live in. One of the misconceptions and reasons of why we're doing this presentation today is just a lot of farms aren't claiming. And again, I think a lot of it just comes down to the fact that there's not a lot of information out there for people. The grant and government world of funding is confusing. I'm sure many of you have seen this during COVID. You hear about all these programs on the news, you try to access them and understand whether or not you could claim, you just don't know. So despite the fact this program's been around so long, again, the information is very vague. Some of the other reasons that farms are not necessarily claiming is some are not incorporated. Some might still just be a sole proprietorship. Could be a legal partnership within the family and things like that. So, you know, it could be a situation where they're not incorporated. If that's the case, and someone's interested in accessing this program, we would just sit down with you and see if it does make sense to incorporate. Doesn't cost very much to do so, and usually the benefits do outweigh any negatives in that case. So it could be a conversation that we could have. Again, a lot of people just aren't aware that the work they're doing is eligible. Because it seems like this is a technology program or a sophisticated science program, a lot of people don't realize that the day in, day out work that they're doing on their farm or their agricultural setting, they just assume it's not eligible because it's not some fancy technology. That's just simply not the case. As you could see from some of those examples I went through, there's a lot of areas where there is eligibility, and again, it just, people don't really realize it. Another reason is there might not be any T4s or subcontractors on there. So there could be where a mom or a dad or a son are working on the farm and they're simply not being paid officially through the company. So if we don't have a way to give somebody's time a value, then I don't know how much they're worth essentially. So if they're not issuing a T4 or a paycheck or something like that, then that would be a conversation we would have in order to get the company issuing payroll of some sort so that we could quantify somebody's time. Another thing we run into a lot is many accountants don't really know about this program. It's no fault to them. It's just not something you learn in school. Again, the government's not going to advertise this program. They're not going to provide a sales pitch to anyone. So a lot of times accountants are not really even aware that, you know, this program is available for their clients. And sometimes, you know, advisors in the agricultural industry, they're not aware that the farm would be eligible. So again, they may have heard a manufacturing or IT company qualifying, but they don't realize people in the agricultural sector also qualify. A lot of companies just think, hey, I'm not eligible. We see it all the time where people self-disqualify. They just think their work is, you know, something so simple, and then it certainly wouldn't qualify for something like this. I could tell you that that's probably not true, but I can see how it could happen. You know, I still remember one of our early on clients, you know, 15 years ago. She was a really small garlic producer out in rural Ontario. And she just thought, I'm growing garlic and I'm, you know, making some preserves with it. And I certainly am not eligible. But at the end of the day, she was. You know, she was making a product that needed to sit on a shelf for a particular period of time without going moldy, or she needed to ensure that the garlic itself, you know, wasn't fermenting over time in the vinegar and things like this. So believe it or not, it sounded like very simple work that she was doing, but she qualified. And she is still one of our clients to this day. And every single year, she just has a really tiny project that she works on. But she always says that we're one of the reasons she stayed in business. With the money she got from this program, she was able to reinvest it into marketing, go to trade shows. And now you see her at all those one-of-a-kind shows and those little trade shows. And it's really neat because, again, at the end of the day, she didn't think she was qualified because it just seemed like simple work for her. And lastly, a lot of people don't like the CRA. You know, nobody likes to talk to the government. Nobody wants to hear from them. Many are concerned that the CRA will come knocking and audit all their information, and that's simply not true. I can assure you that we've been doing this for a long time, and that many CRA members in the SR&ED division are actually quite reasonable and quite nice. And when it comes to audits and things like that, the CRA SR&ED division is a completely separate department. So the only thing that they can ask questions on is only things related to the SR&ED projects themselves. They cannot look or ask about anything outside of that. So there's nothing to be afraid of in that sense. There's a lot of misconceptions about this program. The number one is it's not a grant. I know everybody has heard of grants before. They're Googling them all the time to see which ones they could be eligible for. I can assure you it is not a grant. So it is different. Again, it's not subjective. Again, regardless of how many people are applying for this program, if you do eligible work, you're entitled to your piece of the pie, no matter how many other people are applying, no matter how large their claims tend to be. A big one too is that people often think I need to be profitable in order to take advantage of this program, and that's simply not true. You do not need to be in a profitable position in order to take advantage of this program. Again, SR&ED applications do not lead to any type of CRA audit. Again, it is a completely separate division, and they don't even talk with one another amongst the CRA departments. They're fully separate floors of buildings and things like that, and they're completely unrelated. When it comes to grants, there's a lot of things that people are used to and have heard of. And again, it carries over onto the tax credit side of things. So with grants, again, it's discretionary approval. I often feel like they throw people's applications up in the air and pick one that way because it seems a little confusing and not very systematic in the way they choose who to give the money to. The other thing is programs come and go. I'm sure you've tried to look some up before and you swear you saw it and then the next day it's gone. Every year, a lot of these grants tend to change their criteria. They have budget limits, so it's a fixed amount of money they're giving out. And in the case that you don't get approved by them, there's no way to appeal it. You can't say, hey, I don't think that's fair. I think we qualify. So, I mean, you're essentially putting it into the hands of whoever is choosing which application does get approved. From the tax credit side of thing, and the reason we specialize particularly in this program is it is an entitlement program. Again, you're entitled to your money no matter who else is applying. It's stable. It's been around since the 80s. Like I said, it's not going anywhere. There is a fixed set of criteria and policy behind it. So we're policy experts at the end of the day, and the criteria hasn't changed in all of the years. There's no budget limit. The only changes I've seen in terms of how much money is spent on this program every year is just a little bit about who's in power at the government. However, last year there was over 20,000 applications and they gave away over $3 billion. So it's a very large program, and it's certainly not going to go anywhere anytime soon. And lastly, there's an appeals process. So if we disagree with the government's decision, we can appeal that. from there, we can object that if we don't agree with it. And we've actually gone all the way as to fight against the CRA in tax court, where we believed it was a very small client with a very small claim, but we insisted that they were eligible. And the judge sided with us. They got all their money and then some. And it was a matter of just proving ourselves at that point. Every single case and client we work with, we would certainly defend tooth and nail because we believe that there is eligibility there. There's a lot of things when it comes to eligible activities. So I know I've talked about, people's time and materials and things like that. But when it comes to actually what is it that's eligible and how much time of someone's, workload would be eligible, what could it be? So in this, when it comes to eligible activities, the person needs to be directly related to solving the problem or, creating a solution for exactly what that they're interested in. So somebody had a hypothesis like, if I water the corn at 7 o'clock in the morning and 7 o'clock at night, I think my corn will be healthier and it will yield more corn over the growing and crop season. So if that's their idea and I can Google it and I cannot find an answer to my problem, now someone's going to go, they're going to water their corn at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. every single day. They're going to come up with some observations like, yeah, it seems to be working. And at the end of the day, either they were successful or not. It could have been that, hey, it didn't change anything and it was, somewhat of a failure per se, or hey, you know what, our corn was fantastic this year. It was sweeter than ever. We had less crop loss than we did last year. Then all of the time that somebody spent watering the corn at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. every single day, all of that time would be eligible because it's related to the actual project and the advancement that they're trying to gain by doing this. This type of area is important when it comes to eligible stuff that the CRA cares about. So they want to know, did you design your idea? So was it someone else's idea that you're simply trying out, or did you have an idea one day you wanted to try? You need to collect some data. So if you are watering at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., you would know that your data collection every single day would be, yep, I watered at this time and I watered this much. The analysis of the data. So at the end of your project or growing season or whatever it might be, you're going to say, hey, did this work or did it not? And anybody that's directly engaged in this work and qualified to do so, whether it be that, they're a farmer and they're fully equipped to, do farming activities, then those are the types of things that would be eligible and activities that are eligible as well. Some considerations, again, you do have to be incorporated, and the T-Ford area is the most important part of the program. The next one's very important. A lot of farms run into this. Dividends are not eligible. Even though being paid on a dividend at the end of the day is not a whole lot different than earning a T-Ford paycheck, it is according to the CRA and when it comes down to it. So dividends, even though the project itself could be eligible, someone's time at that point isn't. So at that point, we do have a conversation to see whether or not it makes sense to switch over from dividends to a T-Ford payroll. The best part is you can go back 2 years. So depending on when your year end is, let's say it's December and follows the calendar, you could actually go back almost 2 years and put in an application to cover any of the stuff that you've already done. In my opinion, this is super important right now, especially with the COVID situation. Many companies are on the brink of not being able to pay their employees, maybe having to lay off employees. Maybe they can't get people, foreign workers here to help on the farm that they have done regularly year after year because the border's closed or it's too dangerous. So the nice thing is this program right now is really a good stimulus package for businesses to get the money that they need in order to continue their operations as they see fit and even move forward. And the best part is it's part of the corporate tax return. So every year when your accountant does your taxes for you, or you might do them yourself, the SR&ED forms are there, but they go in blank if you're not claiming. So it's not some fancy thing outside that anybody needs to understand. We work directly with people's accountants to help them, understand this. We do all of the complicated scientific stuff, and we put it on the tax forms for an accountant to file with their case. So it's really not tricky when it comes to actually filing it. And again, we're dealing with the CRAs. We follow up with them all the time to make sure the refund's on its way. There is a timeline that is very important when it comes to filing these cases. So if you do want to file, it has to be submitted to the government 18 months after your year end. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about this one. Doesn't matter if a tornado ripped through your house and you couldn't get to the post office. They don't care. They're very particular about this. If you are receiving any other government funding or research funding or any things like that, we do ask to know about them. It's important. You can't double dip, right? So if you received a grant for a particular project and then you try to claim the labor on that particular project, but it was already funded using government money, you can't double dip and get more government money for it. So it is important that we know all the sources of where any of these grants or things like that or any funding might be coming from. And then intellectual property is important. I know intellectual property sounds fancy and it often sounds like something an IT company might be doing. However, intellectual property can apply this way too. Maybe yourself and you're a cow farmer and you are working with a grain company to come up with a better feed for your animals. It has to be clear who owns the answer or the advancement in knowledge at the end of the day. If it's shared 50-50, then each company could put in a claim for 50% of the work. Or if one of them owns the rights to it, then the person who owns the rights to that information is the one who could put in a case. So it's important, just again, so two people aren't putting in a claim for the same work that they did. Again, salaries versus dividends. Many farms declare dividends because of their accountants or financial advisors. And while it does make sense if you're not claiming the SR&ED program, it does not always make sense if you are. And because it is such a generous program, at the end of the day, you could get 65% of the money you're spending on employees and crop loss or materials back. Usually it does make sense for someone to not pay themselves on dividends anymore. Also, sometimes there are family trusts and things like that, and that might be the reason for these dividends, but certainly with the right accountants, there are ways to structure all of this and keep all of that. Again, many farms are unincorporated. They don't have to be, but they would just simply lose out on this program. And then it's a lot of times people just don't get their cases in on time. So that's very important too. And again, because we can do retroactive claims, there is a way for us to work with someone's accountant or financial advisor, whoever gives them information on these types of things, to ensure that they do have eligible ways to claim the program. Again, if you were to have eligible wages, let's say $100,000, and you were to pay them on salary, then you would get up, in this case, 66.5%. So I always say 65%, but 66.5 is the CRA's straight number. So you would get $66,000 back. If you paid that same amount of money to yourself or someone who works for you in dividends, you would get nothing. Even if it's the same project, the work itself is eligible, but the money's not. So essentially, you lose out on the program itself. Again, incorporated versus unincorporated. If you're an incorporated business, you can take advantage of the program. If you're not incorporated, unfortunately, cases cannot be put in for you. It's really just not designed for sole proprietors. There is a way to do it as a legal partnership. However, it's a lot more complicated and the return is very low, but there is a possibility if you do run your business as a legal partnership to do it that way. SR&ED Proof is something that we came up with a couple years ago that really helps people understand the program by giving the CRA the information that they want to see. So we've learned over the years the CRA has a very particular way of wanting to see information, but they don't tell you how they want to see their information. So it kind of is like a little encryption key, and luckily we've gathered a bunch of info over the years, put it all together, and created this online portal for people where they can use this portal to track their projects. And it has little wizards built in, like little questionnaires almost. So it's simple answers to questions, but you don't even realize you're following the CRA's policy in the process. So it's a good tool for people to use. If they're a little unsure about the program itself, it really spells it out. It's a very intuitive way to do things. It is not complicated. If you can log into your email, you can log into this program as well. And it really just allows everybody to see things All of our clients get this access for free, and then it is a subscription model for some. So we do have some people who just buy this as a subscription so they can track their projects internally. And it really just makes it simple. You drag and drop things in a calendar. You can put experiments on here, or you can put, all the watering of the corn you might have done at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. on here, so you remember it all. So kind of one central spot that people can use to track some of these things. And if somebody works with us, it's kind of nice. Our analysts on our end can give you hints about things that could go in here, and they can access the info. So it's kind of neat to see. It's a little bit interactive in that sense. Some people know a little about us. Some people have never heard about us before. I want to say that it's very important when working with this program is to deal with people who have the knowledge of the policy. They need to be policy experts. As Chrissy alluded to, and thank you, we've been doing this for a long time. We've put in a lot of cases, and we've learned a lot over the years. There's some fantastic resources at the CRA who've given us a lot of insight about what they like to see. Our team is a team of people on staff. Many people out there have subcontractors, so it's important that you work with somebody who understands your field. So from our perspective, if we had an engineering client, they would go to our person who has a master's in engineering. If we have an agricultural case, we would be sending it to somebody who has their bioscience background. So it's important to have that base level of knowledge in a particular industry before starting one of these cases, in order to just have that knowledge of what's already out there and what's not. This year, one of the things we did to make it easier for everybody to understand this program out there is to break out SR&ED into smaller subgroups. So as you can see right in the middle is SR&ED Farms. So instead of somebody just going to a complicated website like Bonds and trying to understand SR&ED in their industry, they could go to something like SR&ED Farms, and they could find things that are related specifically to their industry. So whether it's information on eligible projects, whether it's just understanding the program from their side of things. Again, it's not going to talk about technology and manufacturing in there. It's going to talk about examples related to the farming field. It's the same way, for example, as SR&ED Food. It gives examples of clients that we've worked with before in the food sector and how people in that area could be potentially eligible. So it is a nice way for people to see things in their industry, in their world, and fully understand things a little bit better. Again, it's a complicated program, so we're trying to do our best to educate everybody and make it a little easier to understand. SR&ED Farms itself, like I said, great resource if you are a farmer and you're so uncertain about whether or not your daily operations may or may not qualify. Great resource to just take a look at. There's examples on there. There's some questions that if you answer yes to, you're probably eligible. So you can just take a look and see. It is a really great resource for anyone in the farming industry. Again, same thing as SR&ED Food. The SR&ED food sector is humongous, whether it be food manufacturing, processing, all that kind of stuff. As you can imagine, with people having dietary and allergen restrictions these days, gluten-free being big and trendy, most gluten-free products are eligible because you're taking away something that usually binds things and replacing it with something that doesn't. So and not to mention, you want it to taste good and not be a brick for a loaf of bread. So there's a lot of areas in the food sector that are eligible. I could spend an hour just talking about that sector itself, but on this website it does give particular examples. When it comes to resources, there's a lot, and I believe that you guys will have access to this presentation at some point. There's a lot of areas where you can find some information about this program. Again, it's CRA talk, so I will warn you, it's very boring and a little bit confusing. Even to this day, I've been to some of these CRA seminars that they host for SR&ED information, and they make it a little confusing to understand. But here, I mean, again, it is a CRA-based program. It's on the CRA's website. I assure you, this is not something that I made up myself, and it's not just a grant that comes and goes. There's a sector for eligibility and what you can claim. It doesn't give examples, but it does kind of list out some of the things that are eligible. There's some guidelines, tools, and then the forms themselves. So I do recommend if you try to do this program on your own, to seek out certainly some expert advice before doing so. It is a complicated program, and at the end of the day, the CRA is particular. if you said the word trial and error instead of experimentation, then they simply wouldn't approve your case. Even though at the end of the day, you probably meant the same thing. Unfortunately, trial and error to them doesn't seem like a systematic way of doing things. So it's a matter of really understanding this program and what the CRA wants to see. From our perspective, we try to continue to provide people with information and also just up-to-date things happening within our industry. We do have a video learning series, which really does answer everyone's basic questions about the program, about eligibility and all of that kind of stuff. With our blog, we try to put out things that are more relevant. So it could be some sort of tax court case or, something that's relevant to a policy change. On our LinkedIn, our marketing department, Diana, is fantastic at updating things that are approved. So if we have, somebody approved in the wine industry, we'll put that on there. And so you can kind of see the types of cases that are getting approved on a regular basis. And you'll see a trend in agricultural as well as the food sector for sure. From there, I'm not going to get into any more tax and boring stuff. I know I could spend all day talking to everybody, and I know probably the most common question is, am I eligible? Certainly I can chat with everybody if it's about their own specific business offline, not to, provide everybody here with information about each other's businesses, but I'm sure that there's some basic questions that some people might have. I know it's a lot of information to digest, and I know taxes are not something that everyone thinks of when it comes to the agricultural industry. But certainly if there are some generic questions about some of the info today, I would be happy to answer them.
Yeah, awesome. What an excellent presentation.
Thanks, Chrissy.
It's a really big deal for Canadian farmers, and I think a lot of Canadian farmers need to get on board here and need to see if they are eligible or not. There's a lot of money here at stake, so I'm really excited to be able to help connect some farmers with you guys. This is a really good cause. A couple of questions here. One is, will this cause an audit from the CRA?
That's a good question. So it won't. Again, the only thing that might happen is an audit related to the SR&ED project. One of the reasons for that, and kind of the funny things about it, is that if you put in an SR&ED case, you cannot send in supporting documentation. So one of the reasons it's important to hire an expert at some point is to help the CRA understand your story and the money that you're asking for without having to ask additional questions. If they do have additional questions, they will set up a meeting where bond is involved and present. Obviously not right now with COVID, it's done over the phone. However, they might ask for information like, hey, if you said you paid an employee on a T4, I want to see their T4. So that's the only type of audit that it might trigger, but otherwise it's nothing corporate related.
Good. And we also have a question, can I only put in a claim once?
Very good question. No, you can actually put in a claim every single fiscal year. So some people might have a project that's ongoing. You might have, a particular crop you're growing and it takes 3 years before it yields fruit or something like that. So maybe a multiple year project, and we can claim every single year. It can be any number of projects in a particular year. There's no cap, which often gets asked as well. And no, so you can claim indefinitely that the program's around and it's year after year.
That's great. Another question, is it possible to talk to someone who's been through this or is currently going through it with success?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a bunch of testimonials on our website, but depending on what industry you might be in, we can certainly connect you with one of our clients who's in your industry, and you can chat with them about the process and pick their brain for sure. Okay.
And then there's another question here. What about, so you went through the amount of money and there was a range. Is there an average, or is there industry average? Or is it just a big, wide gap?
That's a really good question. I would say average return for a corporation with T4 employees is around the $50,000 mark. But we've got some super small claims that are $5,000, and then we've got larger claims that are well over $1 million. So it really depends on the size of the operation and how much time they spend on these particular projects. But there's no cap, and certainly not really a minimum either.
Right. Oh, that's great. All right, so I see your contact information here. Also, anyone in the audience can go to NorthAmericanEgg.com. You're an exhibitor for the show, and you are also on the demo and discussion page, so you can go through there. Yeah, thank you so much, Jennifer. This is really great information for Canadian farmers.
Thanks very much for having us.
Yes. Hey, do you have any closing or parting remarks?
No, I just appreciate everybody's time today. I know it's a lot to take in, and happy to answer specific questions. But otherwise, we're just happy if people are, interested in this program and taking advantage of this program, however they may choose to do so, so that they get their piece of the pie from the government instead of the money always going the other way.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. Very good. Well, we will send people to you, and we'll continue doing that, and we'll get the YouTube video up in a little bit.
Great. Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of the trade show.
Thank you. You too. Thanks so much.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.